Hi, welcome to Open Hand Farm. My name is Penny, and today we're going to be doing some fermenting. I just finished the Every Bit Counts challenge that is put on by Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead. And in that challenge, I fermented some cherry tomatoes in order to preserve them. I love those things. This is what they look like. And there's not as many in here as it look. They're kind of floating around on me. But I wanted to start some new ones so that when these are gone, I have more to fall back onto. I found a recipe for cinnamon fermented apples, and we're going to do that too. So let's get these started. The first thing I'm going to do is to start my brine because it has to have salt in it and I want it to have time to dissolve in my filtered water. So I have 4 cups of unchlorinated water here. You do not want to use your tap water because it has chlorine in it and it will hinder the fermentation. So I'm going to use Redmond's real salt, and it has minerals and different things in it that are really good for you. We need 3 tablespoons. You could also use a kosher pickling or sea salt. Now, we're going to get that stirred in. And I will be stirring this off and on during the process of putting these together. Okay, let me tell you the ingredients. We have 4 cups of cherry tomatoes. I went out and picked these this morning. We have black peppercorns. We have coriander seeds. And we have mustard seeds. We also have 4 cloves of garlic, basil and parsley. I picked this from my garden the other day and have kept it in the fridge waiting for this opportunity. Now we'll start the process of putting it together. We're going to use a quart jar and we are just going to put all of the seeds in the bottom of the jar. And for each seed we're going to use 1/4 of a teaspoon. That's not very many, but you will definitely taste them. I suppose if you want to do more, you're welcome to. I would do it like this first, though, to make sure that you feel like you need to use more the next time. So we put those in the bottom. We are just going to start layering the tomatoes, basil, and parsley. So I'm going to put in a few of these. And then I don't want all of these big sticks in there, so I'm just going to take the leaves off and put them in. And some parsley. Now we're also going to go ahead and layer in our garlics. Now, I was watching Jessica at Three Rivers Homestead the other day, and she had soaked her garlic in water to make it peel easily. And so I thought, I'll do that this morning. So I looked it up to see if I use hot or cool water, and there was a suggestion for both. So I have put 2 of my cloves in warm water and 2 in very cold water. So let's see which one works the best. So supposedly I can just peel these off. Oh my goodness, you guys. They've been sitting here about 5 to 7 or so minutes. And look at that. Look at that. Okay. So let's go ahead and put the warm water peeled in. Then we're going to add some more tomatoes. Then we're going to add more basil. And more parsley. And let's do the cold water garlics. Well, they peel very easily too. So I guess it does not matter if it's cold or hot water. You can just do that. So if you have a project where you need a lot of garlics peeled, I would definitely soak them. Unless you are doing like a garlic infused honey, do not do that, because you do not want to introduce moisture into your honey and garlic mixture, or it might mold on you. Okay, that's all I can fit in there. I might top it off just because it's so pretty with some more of the herbs. Okay, now all we have to do is add our salt water. This is still a little grainy in the bottom, so I'm just gonna stir it here a minute before I pour. And you want to cover your tomatoes. And you will see that I did not use all 4 cups of tomatoes. I didn't last time either, because I have this glass weight that I like to put on top of my jar. And it needs to be able to not come out the top of the jar, or else my lid won't go on. So I'm gonna push this, and I know I'm gonna make a mess. I'm just gonna kind of flatten some of those. And I have to tell you something else I did not do this time. I did not poke holes in the cherry tomatoes. This recipe does not say to. I did not use all the brine. I do have more tomatoes. I do have more herbs, so I might, in just a little bit, put together another jar. But for now, that's all there is to it. And I always set my jars in a bowl. I use these little like bottle nipple lids that have a little X cut in them. And that helps for the gases that are going to be building up in here as the fermentation takes place. And they can just kind of come over the edge and make a mess in the bowl instead of on the shelf that I have them sitting on. So these will sit for 6 to 8 days. All right, I'm gonna clean up this mess, and then we're gonna start the apples. The first thing I wanna talk about before we make the apples is that this recipe, and several recipes I have seen, has asked you to add a starter culture to the fermented mixture to make the ferment go faster and better. I have never done that. A friend of mine that does a lot of fermentation classes and stuff, she has not done it either. But I want to show you some options so that you'll know what they're talking about. So one of them is to use whey. Now, whey is the liquid that comes up on the top of your yogurt or sour cream. And what I do is I just keep a jar in the fridge, and in the mornings when I'm gonna have my yogurt, I just pour the whey off. And that way I have some stored in my fridge to use for different purposes. So that is one option that you can use. I personally don't want to use whey because it still has some of the milky product in there, it looks like to me. So I'm afraid to put a milky product in my fermentation, unless it's something that is milky, like yogurt or kefir or something like that. So I would not use this, but many recipes say you can use whey. So that is an option. Now this recipe says that I could use kombucha. So this is my kombucha SCOBY Hotel. And as you can see, I have some very happy SCOBYs in here. So I'm just gonna pour off some of that and apparently make a mess doing it. You close it back up. Now this is a liquid that I wouldn't mind putting in because especially with apples, I've made apple kombucha before and it's really, really good. So for this recipe, I need 1 to 2 tablespoons. So I'm just going to measure this. I'm going to do 1.5. We'll call it in the middle. Now you'll notice that I did not stick anything into my kombucha to grab it out. I poured it out because I don't want to introduce anything into my starter tea that might hinder it from growing or put some bacteria in it or whatever. So don't go down in with a spoon or a cup or whatever. Instead, pour it out and use it. And now I've got a little drink for later. So we're going to set that aside as one of our ingredients. If you are not familiar with kombucha, it is a fermented tea. And I do have a video about making kombucha. So I will leave a card for that right up here and put a link in the description box. So let's go over the items that we will need for the fermented apples. We of course need apples. It calls for peeled and chopped apple. So it's 3.5 cups and it says approximately 3 large apples. So that's what I'm going to start with to see if we indeed have 3.5 cups. We also need the juice from 1 large lemon. You could use lemon juice out of a bottle, but I'm going to go ahead and use the lemon. We will want 1 to 2 tablespoons of a starter culture. Again, this is optional. We'll need water. We'll need our salt again. And we're going to use cinnamon. Now this says that you can do a cinnamon stick or ground cinnamon. So I'm going to go with the ground cinnamon because I feel like it will layer and cover the apples better. The first thing I need to do is peel and chop my apples. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm just doing this the easy way. I peeled the apples and now I'm using my apple wedge to finish the job. And I'm cutting them in about 3/4 of an inch pieces after they've been cut into the wedge piece, which is 1/8 of the apple. Now, if you're using a smaller apple, you might not get as many pieces out of your wedges. It's okay. This is a lot of apples, you guys. It says 3.5 cups. I'm not even going to measure because what I do know is it needs to fit in my quart jar. So I am just going to go ahead and pack my apples in my jar. Now, if you're adding a cinnamon stick instead of powdered cinnamon, you want to go ahead and stick your cinnamon stick in here now as well. So I guess my apples were a little bigger than what they expected someone's apples to be. Now you do want to pack them pretty well. Of course, I do want to leave enough room for my weight, and I think that's about as good as it's going to get. And it's always better to check this before you add your brine, because once you add your brine, this gets wet or filled with the brine, and it's a little harder to pull out of the jar. All right, I guess this is my lunch. So the next thing that we want to do is make our brine. We're going to take our lemon and we're going to roll it to release some of the juices. And then we're going to use it to get our lemon juice. I'm going to use this and not get any seeds in it. So we're going to add that. And if you're using lemon juice from a jar, there is a measurement on the back that tells you how much lemon juice would be the equivalent of using a lemon. So you can just use that. Now we're going to add our salt, and it's a much smaller amount than what we used on the tomatoes. We're going to use 1/2 to 1 teaspoon. Well, I always feel like ferments are a little salty, so since I added the extra kombucha, I'm going with the 1/2 teaspoon. And then we're going to add our cinnamon. And that is 1 tablespoon. Now I can get on board with that. Try to get that cinnamon incorporated. That's always a tricky thing to do. We're getting there though. There we go. I didn't think it was going to happen. All right, now we're going to pour this over our apples. And then, as you can see, it does not fill and cover the apples. So what you're supposed to do is use filtered water to complete filling to cover the top of the apples. So I'm going to grab some of that. And I just used my same measuring cup, so if there's any ingredients left in there, I can still use them up. All right, the apples are covered. I'm going to add my weight. I'll probably make a mess. I always do. I'm going to push down, and you see that liquid comes up so that I know my apples are covered. So when I put this lid on, that will hold that in that position. And there's my cinnamon apples ready to ferment. See the air bubbles just kind of coming out and around the apples, which is good. We want to make sure there's liquid in all of them. And let's label our jars. Okay, I got them labeled. I just use a little Post-it note and I write on it with permanent marker. But when the liquid starts coming out over the edge of the lid, it kind of messes up the ink. So I put Scotch tape over it just to protect it so that I don't mess up on how long something should be fermenting. You will want to check your tomatoes after 6 days. And I just set them in my pantry on a shelf, and using a lid that takes care of burping the gases for you, you don't have to worry about them. Now, if you don't have one of these lids and you're just using a regular lid, then you will want to open that lid every day at least once and just kind of let the gases go. So if that's what you need to do, I would set an alarm on my phone or my watch or whatever so that you don't forget. Because what can happen is if they get too full in there and that effervescent wonderfulness of fermentation can blow your lid off. So don't forget to let the gases out. I will leave a link to this type of lid in my description box in case you need some. They're not real expensive. And this is just a normal canning ring that holds it on. The apples, you are going to start checking those after 2 days. And what you're looking for is you want it to be really bubbly. And I will tell you that fruit ferments much faster than anything else because of the sugars in it. And also I added the kombucha, which is an extra already fermented item that's going to make this happen even faster. So after 2 days, start checking. Is it bubbly and active? Does it have a slight alcohol smell to it? Because of the sugars in fruit, it will have a slight alcohol scent to it. Now, if you let it keep going, you're going to end up with a full-blown alcohol. So once it is to your liking, you want to take the fermenting lid off, put your regular lid on, and put it in the fridge. And at that point, you can store it from anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. And you just want to keep an eye on it. I don't know that these would last for 2 months at my house, I really doubt it. But I have had ferments that have lasted for up to a year in my refrigerator, and some of those were fruit. But I will say that the liquid did have a much more alcohol content taste to it. Now, the same with the tomatoes. You go ahead and take the fermenting lid off, put a normal lid on, and store them in the refrigerator. I did get a second jar filled, so that's exciting. Now I can put them out for my ladies' coffee group next week. I hope that they enjoy them. I wanted to share one more ferment that is so simple, and I mentioned it earlier. I did this in one of my Every Bit Counts challenge days. I just took a bunch of garlics, I peeled them, and I filled this jar about 3/4 full. Then I just covered them with a raw honey. It needs to be a raw honey. And I put a lid on. I don't put a fermenting lid on. I put a normal lid on. And then I loosen it. So it's sitting there loose. So if there's any bubbling or whatever that occurs, which it will, mine is not yet. For the honey, you have to let it set for 6 weeks. So mine hasn't quite started bubbling yet, but it will soon. Then what you want to do every day, if you think about it, if not every other day, is tighten your lid. Don't forget that part. Turn your jar over and kind of shake it around, because you want to make sure that all of those garlics are covered in honey to preserve them. Now what will happen is the honey gets really wet. Do you see how I'm shaking that? And it's like liquid. It's not thick like honey. And some of this honey was even crystallized and was very hard in the bottom of this jar. But it's starting to eat away at the crystallization, and it gets really wet instead of thick. And what you can do with this, once it is all done, actually you could start using it after 3 weeks. Go ahead and start if you need to, but the honey is great as a cough syrup because it's got the natural, wonderful goodness of garlic in it and the natural, wonderful goodness of raw honey. And it works great for a cough or itchy throat. But you can also eat the garlics, and that will really help if you have a sinus infection or a cough or something like that. And the garlics will continue to get more and more soft and sweet instead of hard and bitter. So this is just a win-win, because you can also just eat the garlic for the fun of it, put it in a recipe. I have used the garlic honey on pizza. So good. And just use it however you want. Mine will be done on October 1st. So I'm about 4 weeks out, 3.5 weeks out. But what I want to remember to do after I shake it is to loosen that lid again. And I keep it on a plate in my pantry. Now, because I keep it on a plate in my pantry and I don't want somebody to think, oh, I'm going to move that jar and look behind it or whatever, I try to put it in a very inconspicuous spot. I put a little label on it that says, do not move this jar. So my husband knows that if he sees a jar with that sign on it, he's not going to pick that jar up and try to move it. Or if he has to, he'll know he better check the lid. So just make sure everybody in your house knows that. I'm always looking for recipes of ferments that are something that the rest of my family will eat. I'm hoping the apples is one of those. My husband will eat sauerkraut, but he's not a tomato eater. He's not really a garlic eater. And any other thing that I make, kombucha, kefir, he doesn't do those either. So I'm hoping the apples will be a win. I hope one of these are a win for your family as well. If you have a favorite ferment recipe, let me know what it is so that I can try it too. And until next time, blessings on you and yours.